Hi, it's Paul. Today I'm going to build a scene pretty well from scratch in Factory IO, and I'm going to set it up to program it in Studio 5000. Let's take a look first at Factory IO. When you open Factory IO, you come up with this splash screen, and I think a lot of times we kind of go right past this and we go and open up our scene that we're working on and we get to work. But let's have a look here. It's got some good stuff. So there's some tutorials for Alan Bradley that might be of benefit. And there's manual and parts and a description of all the scenes. But the main one you're going to want to pay attention to is this getting started. So click on that and that'll open up in your web browser. And here they have an online kind of like a manual or an overview of how to set things up in Factory IO, such as over here in chapter 3, creating a scene. It walks you through a lot of the details. So take a look at that, and that's got some good help in there. Next, I'm going to start with a completely empty scene. So I've got my factory with nothing in it. When I go to my drivers, there's no driver, there's nothing set up. So I'm going to select Alan Bradley. It's called Logix 5000. That's the old name for Studio 5000. Okay, and it gives us kind of a default setup when we first start. We've got a lot of Boolean inputs and outputs, some floats, which are also called real numbers, and some integers. So we've already got a start. When we go to configuration, make sure we've got the IP address for our emulator and the slots correct. If we want to adjust, let's go back to this screen. If we want to adjust how many inputs and outputs we have available, this is kind of like building our PLC. We go to configuration and we can make these numbers different. So I'm going to change my outputs to 8. I'll change my inputs to 8. So there, it's updated. Now that's like I said, it's like my PLC. I don't have anything in my factory, so there's nothing really to connect to it other than some default tags that Factory IO has. So we'll go back to the scene, and I'm just going to put a couple things in. There's a load transfer station, and I'll put in there's my e-stop. Put my e-stop in, and I'll put a counter in. So I've got a couple things that I can work with. Now, when you're in run mode, you can't move these guys around, but you can activate them. But when you're in stop mode, you can move them around, and notice it shows a grid of where you're moving. And then if you want to change, well, first of all, if you want to center on your scene, just double click, and wherever you double click, that's where the view will center. If I want to move this e-stop up, I just hold my V key down, and then I can move it to, maybe I'll put it right there. And my counter, I'm going to put it right there, then hold the V key, and maybe I'll put it right there. Okay, there's my e-stop, my counter, and maybe I'll just put in a start button over there. There's my start button, and if you pay attention to the arrow below it, it shows you basically where it's going to put it. That's a little bit high, so I'll hold the V key down and I'll just pull it down. Okay, I've got, let me pull my e-stop down too, so it looks a little better. There. I've got a start button, an e-stop, and a counter on my little load station. Let's go back to drivers. And now these inputs and outputs are available, but I have to attach them to this virtual PLC. So there's my e-stop. I'm just going to drag it over. If I try to attach it to a real number, it won't take because this is an input output. It won't go to an integer, so I can attach it there at bool in 0. There's my start button, same thing, I can attach it there. My digital display, it's blue and it wants to hook to a float, but I want an integer and I can't hook it to my integer. So what I have to do is go back to my scene, and each one of these components can be configured differently. If I right click on the transfer thing, I can't do much with it. I can delete it, duplicate it, do a horizontal, vertical movement. Yaw is just spinning it, so I can spin it around. But I can't configure it. When I go to my counter display, now I can yaw, roll. I can change the pitch. Not sure that I want to, but I could. And down here in configuration, you can see that the default is set to 0 to 10 volts. If I want integer, I have to change it here. And before I do that, let's go back and look at the drivers again. Notice that here's my digital display and it has the blue, which is for a real number. Now I'm going to change the configuration. I'm going to change that to an integer. I'll go back to drivers. There's my display, and now it's orange. Now I can connect that to my integer out. So put your components in and then configure them, or at least explore them to see what kind of configuration you can do. I'm going to go back and put a belt conveyor in. There's my belt conveyor. When I right click on that, I can use an encoder, which tells me location, and I can configure it for digital plus minus. That'll make it go forward and backward, and I can set up as analog. So there's different, depending on the component you use, there's different things you can configure. Best to get these set up before you try to set it up in Studio 5000, because as you saw with this display, when I changed the configuration, it changed it from a real number or a float, it changed it to an integer. So if I had already set it up in Studio 5000 and then I came back and changed the configuration, I wouldn't be able to talk to it. Okay, let me minimize this or reduce it and bring up our tags. Let's see, I've got my digital display and my start buttons connected, and here's my conveyor left and right. So I'm gonna just connect those. And actually that's my encoder signal that's coming into my PLC, and here's my conveyor chain plus and chain minus. I'll just hook all these guys up. Alright, so all my inputs and outputs in my scene are connected to this virtual PLC. Now when I go over to Studio 5000, first thing I'm going to do is go into my controller tags and edit my tags. In here I need to exactly duplicate these names. So put my cap lock on. First one is bool in 0. So bool in 0. And when I use the space bar, it puts in that underbar for me. So boolean 0, and my data type needs to be a bool. Now I need boolean 0 through 7 in this PLC. So I'm going to click just to the left of the boolean 0, highlight that whole bar, and copy, and I'll go down one. You have to click in this box over to the left and paste, paste again, paste. So I was just holding down the control key and hitting V, and that was pasting them in, and notice how it automatically updated my numbers. So I've got my boolean 0 through 7. Now I need float in 0 through 3. So I'll type the first one. And that is a real number. Sometimes they call it float, as in floating decimal, sometimes a real number. In other words, it can be a decimal number. And they both mean the same thing. So again, highlight it, copy it, go down one, and paste it a couple times. There's my float ends. I'll do my int in 0. And that one, Factory.io prefers it to be an int instead of a dint. And I haven't checked with this version. With the older version of Factory.io, you would sometimes get an error if you left it as a dint. I always change it to an int, and I don't have any problems, so that's the habit I have. So I'll copy that guy, paste it a couple times, and that matches up. Now I need my bool out 0. That's a bool. And copy and paste, and I'll go all the way down with those guys and get them all logged in. So this is like setting up my addresses in Studio 5000. I usually do it right up here in controller tags just to keep things organized. And then down in parameters and local tags, what I do is I set up aliases for those Factory.io addresses. I could program my code just using these as my inputs and outputs, as my tags. But if I use boolean 4, I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's a button or a sensor or could be anything. So it makes my code very hard to follow if I just program with that. So my next step, I go over to parameters and local tags, click on edit tags, and I'm going to use exactly or very similar to what we have here. So I've got eStop1, and I'm just going to call that eStop. Maybe I'll take off my caps. eStop is an alias for boolean 0. Now when I write my code, instead of using boolean 0 as my eStop, I actually use the word eStop. It makes my tags easier. Then start button 1, I'm just going to call it start. And that's an alias for boolean 1. Okay, so I'll go through all my tags, and basically I'm copying what I have in Studio 5000. Sorry, copying what I have in Factory.io into Studio 5000. And then when I go to do my programming, I can put in my input, and I'll call this my eStop. Is that what I call it? Should be E_bar stop. There we are. So when I do my programming, I use the word that describes what it is. It also shows the address, boolean 0, but I don't really care about that because I don't remember what those addresses are. And I know that this input is going to come from my e-stop button in my scene. Okay, so the important things are put your components in when you're building your scene. Once you add your component, I'll put a light in. Once you add your component, you have to go to drivers and find the one you put in. Let's see. Oh, no, that's not it. Here it is. I think no, that's probably the one I put in. Anyway, find the component you put in and hook it to one of these addresses in this virtual PLC. Then go back to your Studio 5000. Make sure you have an address for that in your addresses. And I've got that, bool out 4. And then go to your parameters and local tags. Hit edit. And that's my light. And that's an address for bool out 4. No, I give it the wrong address. Anyway, that's what you do. Set it up in Factory IO and then go over to Studio 5000, set it up there, and then when you write your code, you can actually make them work. Okay, that's it for getting scenes set up, and have fun. Talk to you later.